Okay, boa tardes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our last session before the most important part, perhaps, of the evening, before we get to the drinks. But we'll get started here, and we're going to let the crowd sort of filter in because, like I said, we're going to hopefully try to wrap up as close to 5 o'clock as we can, since we're going to be getting on the road and going to the car restaurant for the Penske Logistic-hosted gala dinner this evening. So a couple of small points as we get started, and again, people will hear this as they come in. On the table in front of you, there are feedback forms. If you could take some time before you leave here, perhaps during this session, if you haven't gotten a chance to do it yet, give us some feedback on the conference today and so far, whether on sessions, on content, location, timings, etc. And then once you've finished it, you can hand it in to one of us, one of our staff members at the end of this session, or simply leave it on the table. We will collect it. It's just, like I say it every year, but we do mean it. This is really important to us to get your feedback on the conference and on the things we should do to improve, to make this event hopefully year on year better and better. And to shape it around what you as an industry feel your need and missing. So again, they're on the table in front of you. Take a couple of minutes throughout this session to do that. As I just mentioned, we're going to leave here around 5 o'clock. We'll have a couple of coaches leaving, a couple of buses leaving pretty soon after this session wraps up. You'd have time to sort of drop something at your room if you needed to, if you're coming to the gala dinner via the bus. Otherwise, just as quickly as you can, get back down and we'll get on the buses. If anybody, of course, those of you who are driving, people who are local, who want to meet us there, and you don't know where the restaurant is, we have the address and directions at the registration desk, so just stop by there and we'll support you however we can in getting there. We're going to have a great last session here. As you can see, we've got 3 senior logistics executives from major car makers here in Brazil and South America. But before we move on to that Q&A, we do like to do a prize draw. When you registered, you gave a business card, and so we like to bring a little something from the UK or from Europe. In this case, I think it's panettone, so it's from Italy, but it's just something we'll give you to take away. We'll do a little prize draw. So if I can ask my long-legged assistant, Brett, to please join me for a moment, I will choose a winner. Hopefully someone I like. Oh, that's not someone I like. Christoph Seitz from CFR Rinkens. Is Christoph here? I mean, we know Christoph's around. There he is. Yeah. So something for the holidays, a little Italian cake. Enjoy. Thank you. Okay, so I want to thank you all again for joining us throughout the day and for having participated as much as you have, to our presenters, to all of the questions, to the think tank moderators and discussions. There's been a lot of interesting, I think, content discussed throughout the day. Some of the things that clearly emerged for me, I mean, clearly we are thankfully in at least seemingly the beginning, or perhaps even getting deeper into a recovery, not by any means to the levels that we saw in 2012 or 13. As I think Paolo said, we're still a little bit in a lost decade here, but still we're moving more in the right direction. But there is a sense of urgency, and I think it's important to sort of capitalize on that urgency, to not just go back to the bad old days, to not just immediately make the same mistakes that would have been made time and time again when volumes climbed the last time in 2008 and 9, whether dealing with the shortage of supply and poor communication. Clearly there's infrastructure issues and bottlenecks that not everyone in this room is in control of, but I mean, if something came through again and again throughout the course of today, was that if we all work together a little bit more, whether in sharing capacity, in improving planning, in working with our suppliers on more coordinated forecasting and plans, sharing capacity, then we can do a lot. We can go some way towards addressing some of those issues. So I think don't lose that sense of urgency. It is quite important, especially because as was pointed out by several of our panelists and speakers throughout the day, this is a global supply chain. You're not just competing General Motors, Ford, Jaguar Land Rover, or FCA. We're competing with Mexico, competing with production capacity with other regions of the world, other countries in Mercosur, and the competitiveness of the supply chain here is vital to Brazil's success, to the region's success indeed. And as we heard, logistics and supply chain, it's not the only part by any means, but it's a really essential part, and I think it's a part of where there's a lot of opportunity to improve some of those KPIs that we see. We heard a lot throughout the day about a tendency to short-term thinking, short-term relationships, the focus on price. There's perhaps a lesson that we all agree on, but nobody is quite, well, not nobody perhaps, but hard to implement is how to kind of move beyond that, work in long-term partnerships, work towards some sort of shared reward, sort of relationship where both sides can mutually benefit. I don't think you should lose hope on those possibilities. I think they're an important part of what the success of this market will mean as the recovery hopefully continues. And as is again brought up again and again, the transformation sweeping across the automotive sector in terms of electromobility, in terms of connectivity, in terms of shared mobility, new definitions of mobility again and again. This is relevant to Brazil. This will be relevant to Brazil, and the industry has to respond to it, whether by using the new tools that are increasingly available in other parts of the world, whether the Industry 4.0 focus we see in Germany. We heard about GM's Glide and the global initiatives. There's a lot of things that are and can happen in Brazil here to keep up with those changes. And as somebody said as well, if you don't work to implement these changes, you will fall behind, even further behind. And I think that's quite an important message here. It's not just about the technology either. Again, Newton's slide this morning. I think people, IT tools, and processes. It's not just one thing. It's working together. And clearly, as the industry changes, a lot of the skills and the soft skills, so to say, that people will need, maybe these are changing as well, and we need to work together to think through what the industry needs in the future. And that's thankfully why we all kind of come together to kind of share these experiences, and don't pretend that this is the only place that you do it, but we're glad that this can continue to be a forum for the industry to come together and hopefully share some problems, and more importantly, look to some solutions. So we'll spend the next hour or so with our executives on stage with some Q&A. We'd like to hopefully get you involved as much as possible as we have throughout the day, so please come with your questions as well, come with your comments, hopefully contradict the panel, disagree with them, agree with them, whatever it might be. Let me introduce, first of all, for some of them who haven't been on stage, I'm very pleased, Luis Santamaria, the head of supply chain management for Fiat Chrysler in Latin America. Thank you very much. Welcoming back to the stage is Newton, of course, from General Motors. So Newton, thank you for all of your time today. And finally, welcome us back is Marcelo Navarro, from the Director of Material Planning and Logistics at Jaguar Land Rover here in Brazil, which has a plant now. So we're very pleased to also that you could join us for the Q&A discussion here. So we've got a couple of volume manufacturers here with pretty significant operations across the region. We have a more premium, newer entry, so good range, I think, for us to kind of talk about some of the issues to address in the market. So I think what I want to start a little bit maybe on our short-term horizon, and then a little bit looking to the long-term horizon. So we've been talking today about some of the recovery, and the automakers on stage here all have various investments and launches and ramp-ups coming up throughout the next year, 2 years in Brazil. When we look ahead to 2018, so in a relatively short time frame, what would you highlight for your supply chain management logistics organizations? What are the top priorities for you and your organization looking out over the next year, the next horizon in terms of logistics, and what do the people in this room as your logistics suppliers and peers have to do to help support you to meet those goals? And we can move from there on to slightly more long term. So maybe we can start with you, Liz.
Okay. Primeiro, obrigado, né? Acho que vários de vocês aí teve a oportunidade de conversar.
Many of you had the opportunity to talk to me last year. As priority, I think everybody here just being here after all this turbulent year, being here is already a victory. But we all survived this period. Somehow we ended up by learning something or a lot of things. Our industry is very complex. We don't have room for amateurs or to play. Being here today means that we are stronger. Scenario is optimistic. When I look ahead, I certainly think that in terms of pressure in the market is gone. The trend here is to have more positive vibes. So there's the possibility of return to growth. We all have that on our radar. I think the great focus is visibility. I think this is one of our priorities. We learned though throughout the year that the more visibility, more information, the more you have strategies on the short and medium and long term, depending on the tactical operational level. That's what we're focusing on. Not losing what we've gained in terms of cost. This will be a great challenge, not only for our internal processes, but the lack of investments. Not today's lack of investments, the last decade in terms of ports, airports, roads, bureaucracy, customs. This will be our great challenge because we'll have to be very close to these things and interact with them. One thing that's a challenge for each one of us is how to integrate more. Our industry is extremely unintegrated. We end up by working with pillars that are feudal. We explore synergies very little. The last group that we had here, discussion group that we had here, we saw that we have so much opportunities to we could should be able to work more coherently and more unified to mitigate and minimize the lack of infrastructure in the region. Not only Brazil, but Argentina, Chile, Colombia, everybody has the same difficulties as far as infrastructure goes. So, visibility, synergy, because we have to explore a little bit more amongst us, and the question of how to sustain costs and efficiency and productivity that we gain over this period, how to maintain it. I think uh, Santa Maria said practically everything, and I agree with him. These main points that he highlighted last year, around this time last year, November, also invited by Chris and the auto logistics team. I said that in our case of General Motors, we were working very hard on improving our internal efficiency. So we were in crisis and we were getting ready to prepare our efficiency of our processes and systems exactly for this time. I believe that in the moment of crisis, most of our companies, all of us here, since we cannot improve sales, we seek reduce expenses and improve quality. Now, the name of the game is another one. With the return to economic growth, the name of the game is to meet clients' demand that's growing. And I think in light of this context that Luis talked about, we will listen, we will hear again those who have been in the market for longer. Any event that we would go to 4 years ago, even the newspapers used to talk about the logistics blackout. This theme has totally disappeared, but it will come up again next year, for sure. Our challenge as companies and as executives, we have to understand that we have a series of restraints that come up that have been made during decades of lack of care. So we need to carry on delivering our products with quality, on time, and at the right cost. This will demand from us different abilities from those that worked so far. And I heard a phrase the other day in an event, probably Charles Diagnis, that says those that survive, those that grows. I don't remember exactly the words. It's not the smartest or the strongest, but it's that who has the capacity to change. So this essentially, us professionals in the supply chain area, we are chameleons because we are eternally changing. When we reach an excellent point, like Alex showed, everything is changed. The variable changed. We reach target, but the target's another one. So this demands from us a lot of capacity and speed in decision making. This is the point that will conduct and that will be requested from us as executives and our teams. And this ability to adapt in spite of the volatility in the market, we try to minimize and work and manage and anticipate historical data, the like presented by PwC representative, but in a horizon of 30 years time, it is always growing peaks that vary from 3 to 6 years. It's always growing by anyway. So this is my view and my contribution um, for Chris. First of all, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Automotive Logistics, Chris, for the invitation. As Newton said, and Santa Maria already said everything, and now he said the rest. So it's interesting to put this into context. Last year I was here, and Moschera, we were getting ready for the future and for the future. And Jaguar started its plant in Itatiaia last year, and it had the challenge of planning for the future. So this year it's a year that the startup, for those that have gone through it, know how difficult it is to get stable. So we had a year to stabilize, and the plant is totally stable. We produce the best cars in the world in our plant in terms of quality, and the great challenge now is to optimize that, and that's what we're seeking. We're seeking optimization both in the supply of imported material, because most of our materials come from abroad, from other OEMs um, different from other OEMs that already have their supplies. Other projects also to optimize what we had locally. I was talking to a partner of ours, DHL. We are working together with DHL to optimize our operation at the plant, seeking cost reduction and efficiency improvement. This is what we're seeking. In fact, today, after this startup, the plant's stable, the operations are stable. We now have to seek improvements and optimization for cost reduction and productivity. So I would say that our challenge now in this market, our market's small in Brazil, we see that compared to the world, it has a lot of potential for growth, another 3%. If we look at the international market, this is over 10%. So as potential, the market has where to grow and how to absorb our demand. So that's the challenge. In fact, we should improve and optimize what we have. And now that we're returning to growth, this is still very slow. We can now deliver the quality that we attained, and now we have excellent quality, and we now delivering what clients are seeking, which is an experience that's unheard of in Brazil. Obrigada.
The panel agreed with each other so much, although maybe not about that JLR makes the best cars in the world. I mean, you might have a different opinion on that one, but clearly everyone has similar priorities ahead, and dealing with the growth and hopefully maintaining it in a stable way, and keeping costs and efficiency front and center. But if we look ahead into that a little bit longer term horizon, 22, 23, 24, 2023, 4 or 5, what would you sort of aim to be significantly different about the way your organization, the way your logistics, supply chain is managed today, then versus today? Because we've talked a lot about the changes on the horizon in the wider industry, technology, etc. We sort of expect that the logistics blackout will return, or at least the talk of it will return in a year or two. Maybe those things are familiar. But what's some maybe more radical changes you might anticipate or aim for when you look out in the more longer term horizon? If anybody wants to start. Actually, why don't we give Marcelo a chance to get the others to agree or disagree with him rather than going the other way around.
Ok. Bom, como eu falei, a gente é uma empresa recente, é uma fábrica nova aqui no Brasil.
We are a new company here in Brazil, and these are products that everybody knows. We think that these are dreams that we make. We are also translating that into our plant. So what's interesting, we see that more than a company, more than in fact a factory that we opened, a plant that we opened, we're starting a new culture. For the long term, I think that's what we're seeking, in fact, with this structuring, with this company that we are creating in Brazil. So we see it from the first person that came in. We started in 2014 when I came in. All the other people who came helped to create this mindset that we have something different and we seek to serve the best way possible. So this culture that makes us different with this old company, we have difficulties in adapting or changing, but we didn't have that. Starting from scratch, we saw that from the beginning we are creating a continuity and all the people are being developed, and this is also a challenge. We always talk about selection of talents that we have to develop and that we must retain. Today I was talking to the people here that we're seeking to deliver not only what the client wishes that will give him make a difference for him, but we do the same thing for our employees. So the investment in culture, in team engagement, is what is going to make the difference in the future. So we're working on this basis. This was always very strong in the company, and at the end, this reflects on the other side. So it's not just the best car. This is subjective. You can find another another car that's better, but you see our cars coming out of Itatiaia that are recognized as best quality.
We're not producing just a product, but it's a dream, and that's what we think. So we start, and if we believe in this as a leader and we transmit this to everyone, I think we can grow, and the company will, in fact, structure itself, and the company will have an impact long term, which is what is being done in the town of Itatiaia. There's a study. Can you hear me at the back? There's a study that was carried out by ILUS. It's a logistics research institute. It's very well recognized in Brazil, and it says the following: the logistic cost for supply chain, compared to the percentage of the GDP in the US, is 5%. The cost of the logistics in Brazil is 11.5 or 12%. So very inefficient. So we, who are professionals of the logistics supply chain, will have a job for a long time. In spite of all the logistics and innovation, which are disruptive, which are coming, we still have a lot of work to do. So I see the following, answering Chris's question, how we're going to position ourselves for the next years, for the next 5 years, I think that we're going to continue based on a few pillars. The first one is to talk about the safety of our clients, the quality of our products, and with an adequate cost, because within the chain, the productive chain, the logistics is an evil need. The lower our budget, the better, right? So everything, every dollar or every real that we can reduce, the better the EBITDA and the return for our shareholders. So the challenge still is large. So how we're going to do this, we have to understand the concept of what is going on in the market, how we're going to position ourselves. So, for example, I think some of you, I was talking with a supplier, there is a lack of space in aeroplanes, especially for clients in Asia, but that is a problem, right? So this partner was showing me that there is an effect, perhaps some of you know, the iPhone launch effect. Have you seen this? I put there effect of iPhone and the cost of air freight internationally, because the launch of an iPhone, ever since the iPhone 4, iPhone 5 until the iPhone 10, the launch is during the same period. And you can see in our case the ports of origin in China. There's some friends that they collapse because they consume every single freight offering that exists. So what did Amazon did? They bought a fleet. I think it must be a Boeing fleet, right? So they bought a fleet of airplanes. So our capability of understanding what often is not obvious, there's a multidisciplinary capacity, which is not only the knowledge that we're going to acquire in an MBA course. This is also important knowledge. So this skill, this business sense, the business sense that an owner has to have to solve problems goes way over. So what we have to do is we have to have strong analytics for our companies and a team of analytics for data analysis and to treat all this. And what I showed you this morning, our big data is going to be big. So the potential of using this information is going to depend on us, what we're going to do with this information to bring better solutions. So analytics is fundamental. And even though we have all these restrictions of the environment, excessive taxes, lacks of efficiency with the public agencies, excessive bureaucracy, all this, we're going to have to continue delivering these results and comparing the quantity of energy that we're going to spend versus more stable to deliver the same results, we're going to have to pedal more. So I think it's the desire to do things. I don't think there's a recipe, but it's the capacity and the consistency of doing things better every day. And innovation. So things like collaboration, like Santa Maria was saying, that's missing in our segment. Collaboration is part of the game. If you say, well, some of them are going to remember, for example, the two main newspapers in our state, each one of these newspapers, they had a logistics company. Now they have just one logistics company. They're going to fight for the content, not for the distribution channel. For example, Souza Cruz, they work together with a chocolate company. So there are a lot of solutions that we don't explore. I think it's the necessity makes us more sensitive. I think the South American executive has a lot of defects. They, for example, punctuality is one of them, but I think we have qualities, and I think that creativity is one of our qualities. When we look 5 years forwards, it's more, it's not one year after the other. I think the things are exponential. So, supply chain, logistics, of what's coming, for example, hybrid cars, this is going to happen. Um, the fact is that it's going that way, and this is going to change some logistics models. So, for example, batteries for electric cars. If some of you are curious, an electric car catching fire, go to Google and have a look at electrical car catching fire. There's some the it might take 32 hours to extinguish the fire. It just doesn't go out. The batteries are going to be produced in Asia. They're going to have to be brought here. I'm going to see what ship wants to put a container full of batteries. So we're going to have other challenges that perhaps we haven't thought about. Working with information. So we're going to have this type of challenge. So I think that things are going to transform themselves. If we think of e-commerce in our segment, it's almost zero. It's difficult for you to see what's happening and not think that at some time people are not going to reinvent themselves and use this channel in another way that we don't explore now. What is the logistics going to be? Are we going to continue delivering cars like we do today, or it's just going to be a means of commercializing and we're going to do the logistics straight with the final consumer? So I think things are going to be disruptive, and we're going to have to reinvent ourselves pretty quickly. So I think that the capacitation of people in the supply chain is fundamental. If we don't prepare people for this type of environment, the suffering levels are going to be gigantic, because they're going to find a situation with a different environment, with a bunch of information, and often the people won't be prepared to take the right decisions. So I think we have to start working with the future generations with this type of technology scenario. So for the new executives, so that they can take the right decisions in the future. I think that's very important. Now, we have 10, 20 years. We're the first generation of a supply chain of Latin America. If we think 20 years ago, we didn't have professionals of supply chain in the same way that we have today, the way that we're evaluated. So the question is, are we working properly? Are we preparing the next generation for this type of environment? So if this depends on schools, I don't know, because the skills that will be needed, I don't know if they exist today. If you go to a trainee, for example, someone who's starting today, and he says, what do you think I should study today? What subjects, what skills should I acquire? I don't know if we're able to give him a vision of more than 3 or 5 years ahead and look further ahead, what we're going to have to develop in people. So I think this is the huge challenge. If we don't start working now, and with all this technology that's coming very quickly, we can have some shocks and not benefit from the wave. I used to have the Flintstones and the Jetstones, which were comics. So them living together is going to be simultaneous from now on. We're going to have to work simultaneously with the Flintstones and the Jetsons, because our side, as a company, we're evolving. We're talking about high technology, but on the other side, you reach the customs and you still depend on a process where you need to fill out 10 forms and wait for someone to be kind enough to solve things, let's see, to free a load, for example. So I think this is the what we're going to have to live with for the next 5 or 10 years. Live with them and maximize the environment and have qualified people for all this.
Kind of pushing it forward is much more sustainable perhaps than transporting lots of batteries by airplanes and stuff. So maybe that we should be looking to the Flintstones in some ways. But all of those are actually very pertinent and good points from across the panel there. And particularly I think on skills and training and how we start preparing for the future. It sort of reminded me, it's sort of out of context, but it reminds me of a quote from Ernest Hemingway from Sun Also Rises, and one character asks the other, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, gradually, little by little, and then all at once. So the changes that are coming and happening little by little, we might not notice them along the way until it's too late. And I think that's very important for the industry to kind of think about as these changes are happening. And kind of connecting that back a little bit to perhaps some of the red flags that we heard from Alex at Jeffco or from Paolo from Penske about some of the short-term thinking that does tend to characterize the industry, certainly in the wake of the crisis, certainly during the crisis, the bid culture, so to speak. How do we kind of square that circle in terms of this relentless focus, obviously, on the cheapest rate and perhaps short-term dynamics and relationships in the context of getting to somewhere which now is so different in the future and requires a long-term focus. Do any of you have any thoughts on how to break that mold, perhaps in the supply chain? Do you have any examples of I think this came up in another discussion earlier, but perhaps we can do it again. Any examples where you're looking to longer term contracts or different ways of working together that might not be so focused on this year's tender and the cheapest price? If anyone wants to take a crack.
Acho que eu posso começar. Obrigado pela gentileza. Acho que a sua pergunta, Cris, ela vai pouco em linha do que
I believe your question has a lot to do with the lessons learned and how to deal with the relations, the commercial relations or the trade relations with the suppliers. My private and personal vision of this is the following. I don't think this is only for a commercial relationship, but any relationship, any professional or personal relationship, it has to have some pillars that have to be obeyed. One of the pillars is trust, a mutual trust. This has to exist in a relationship. Trust is not something that you buy or sell. It's something that you get gradually. So this process of gaining confidence and trust is the repetition of adequate conduct or adequate behavior, so that you give the other side statistical proof of the existence of goodwill. I think this is challenging work for our organizations, where apparently, perhaps not so nowadays, but in the past, the automaker has a strong capacity due to the scale. But today, we have suppliers that are larger than our plants. We have logistic operators that make more than the automaker. So I think this is healthy. It's about more balanced, but independent, or in reality, at the end, it's a one-on-one relationship of those that are representing the company in that specific contract. So even if there's innovation, the capacity of building relationships is fundamental. And there's an old proverb that says the following. It's a Portuguese proverb. In every story, there's side A, side B, and the truth. So we have to take care. Obviously, each one of us as executives defending the interests of our own company, but when we think about longevity of the supply chain, we have to have this vision, this collaborative vision to help. So Steve Kimfer, the first executive in the GM supply chain, he said, look, the relationship has to be fair. When we build a relationship based on solidity, we get credibility in the market. I think this is very important for any relationship based on true good work. I think this has to do with Alex, what Alex said. I think the operators that are working with a client is much easier for you to keep a client than for you to get a new business. It's like a new company that comes here to get a bit of the market share. They're going to have to invest a lot in marketing to be able to bring the image of their organization to the market. So if you're already inside the client, it's much easier. The tier one, the service provider, to stay there because he's a specialist in that part of the business. So there is a big opportunity there of working in this sense of keeping or staying there and of growing in business through this optic. So that's something that I wanted to say, which has to do with what was said this morning or earlier. I have an interesting example to give you. Today we talked a lot about technology, we talked about analysis of big data, which is a trend. It's going to happen and it's going to give us a more competitive edge. On the other hand, we had an example this year in the plant that represents very well this partnership issue, and that was not technological. It was no super technology, no software, nothing that we purchase and then install and develop. What did we do? We went back to the basics. We did what is basic. We know that we have a lot of opportunities in several points of the chain, and we identified an opportunity to improve the internal logistics. So just to put things in context, in the plant we have two service providers. One does the management of the container yard. We have a lot of imported material. We have a high volume of containers, so we have an outsourced company that manages this. And we have another company that is a DHL. Because of the contract, they operate all the material handling. We do the planning. We do all the part of logistics engineering. Of course, there's an integration, but contractually, it's logistics, DHL, and in the contract, we specify clauses of efficiency improvement, and that was very well described. But we said, look, we're on the same side, we're partners, we've already suffered in the beginning, we worked hard in a critical moment. In the beginning, when you do things and then you have to correct things after, we're stabilized. So let's work together to improve. Yeah, sure. Let's do this arm in arm. So we started with a very simple program, which is Kaizen, to eliminate waste. So we worked in teams in small areas, integrating DHL, Jaguar, Land Rover, and other suppliers in this process as well. So what we were able to do, what gain did we have? I think this was a good example of partnership, because even more than the result, we were able to do what our colleague just said, the issue of trust and respect, because working together, it's that focus of a problem, everyone trying to solve it, to get a simple solution without
recognition, and that's why we managed to see reflex in all people that participated in the process, and after that this spreads around the plant. This is an excellent example of what I've seen. I've worked in other companies that have a process of continuous improvement, but I never saw one that integrates a partner in terms of logistics. So we have several partners, and we saw a success case in our plant. What we managed to have, in addition to the improvement, was to establish this environment that that allows for this type of improvement. So there is a notion of respect that's so great. Although there are different companies, we don't deal with anyone differently. This ends up by reflecting in the cost, in the way people bring those ideas. So as I said, we have a lot of future possibilities and tools, but we came back to the basics, working very close and believing in people and in our work, and we gave freedom to everyone to implement their own ideas. We managed to create this collaborative environment, and it's a gain-gain situation. So this was a great success case, and it became a program in the company that will be perpetuated now. Alec was talking about, I can't see in the short term us as a region to seek other tools other than bid to do the processes and start the partnerships, because we have to see that we are in the context in our region of n examples with problems with compliance. All the companies have that here have a compliance area. You're audited all the time, like it or not. You end up by having a process of development of partnerships that go through a bidding process. Maybe in the future we'll get a different tool, but today we do not do that without this internal process. And then, given that this is the context, with the maturity of our society, maybe we'll be able to revisit some things. Until then, we have to look at this bidding process and see how I can optimize that to a point that the technical specification is very clear. I think we lose a lot of time in the company. It happens. We receive the demand, and you end up by building the technical specification along the bid because of the interaction with several partners, and this generates trauma in the process. If you have good specs, good technical specs, bid is healthy and sound to understand what is in the market and validate a supplier that's already in your process already. This is a technical part of the discussion. Another thing about the partnership in the long term, it's up to transparency and visibility. The more visibility you give to your partner or to the organization, internal organization, in terms of cost breakdown, what are the main variables, what influence or not the cost, what are the main drives of technology for that service terminal that can change or generate cost reduction, how can you improve the programs, the improvement programs. So we have classic logistics where we work with ongoing improvement of tools, and you work with the companies that render service to us where you have targets for reduction, annual targets. This is in the contracts, this is very well defined. So more visibility and clear KPIs, work with breakdowns and put that down openly to the organization. Maybe we can find a more effective tool other than bidding. But this today, this is the most efficient one, and we have to see how to optimize that in our day to day. This is my view in terms of contracting. Thank you. Obrigado.
Despite bidding being the dominant, it also doesn't preclude that there are long-term relationships, because you all, clearly have DHL in this case. GM can point with Ryder and Siva and Penske. There's many different long-term relationships that we see across the sector, even within the bidding side of things. So, and it's certainly not just Brazil where we hear complaints about bids and other culture here. We're going to would like to get you guys involved if anyone has any questions or comments, anything to add to the discussion or anything different. Same process as before. Please put your hand up. We have some microphones around the room. Good. We have a question right there. There's a mic behind you. If you say your name and company, please.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Leonardo da Pirelli.
My name is Leonardo from Pirelli. I have a question for the panel, especially on the trend of the car sharing. I think more than the electrification of vehicles, which is already a reality, there's still a great infrastructure oriented to the use of uh, fossil fuels. It's a movement that's very strong in Europe and the United States, and it will not take longer for it to arrive here. In your conception, do you understand that in the long term will cause the volumes of vehicle production in the world to drop? That is, certainly at this time there will be a lot of cars parked, and at 1800 they will start running. In 10 years time, maybe those cars that are parked are an autonomous cars, and it will be running, and maybe a person that would buy a car will no longer buy cars. This is one of the trends that we saw here today. And so my question is that is in the long term this might be a reducer of volume in the production of automobiles. This is a very difficult question to answer. It's a test of assumptions that has a lot of alternatives. To extrapolate and going out of the automotive market and go, for example, to the hotel business, we see that Airbnb today has a number of rooms available, the, more rooms available than all the hotel chains together. So Uber, which is the transport and taxi segment, is the same thing, but with a different commodity. But in fact, what these two companies did was nothing but take advantage of the technological advantage platform available and create new business models. So, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, it's not GM's opinion, we as OEMs are creating hardware. We have the bases that are the cars, but I believe that this market will change based on the behavior of the new consumers. These millenniums that are coming, their relation of owning a car is different. Those who are in contact with boys and girls of 20 and 22 years of age, they are not worried about having a driver's license or having a car.
No que tiver, né? Então, assim, eu acho que sim.
But the cell phone, the mobile phones have to be the state of the art. So this there will be a trend to reduce the number of units produced, but the companies will have to seek other alternatives to carry on developing and surviving in this market, which is a moving market. To give you an example, in the case of General Motors, we have two companies. One, it's called Mavens, which is shared cars, like these bicycles that you see on the streets. You take the bicycle out of this parking lot space and then you put it back. This is very common. In Brazil, we have a pilot project for companies' employees. So this is an alternative of models that is upcoming. And the other one, the Uber.
Só que é um conceito meio de ride sharing, né? Então você pode colocar mais de uma pessoa no mesmo carro, tá? E você paga um valor por aquilo e tal. Então eu acredito que sim, quer dizer, o comportamento do cliente ele está mudando e a relação com o ativo, com o bem também está mudando. Então provavelmente vai ter mudanças nesse
Changes in these forces in the market. Obrigado.
Very interesting topic, and one that many analysts will have different views on. I think the point that Newton made, pointing to the GM example, but you can look at it from Volkswagen as well with their new mobility brand, Ford's mobility push, collaborations between companies like FCA and Google, and you can see this, that the car makers are looking to change their business models at the same time as maintaining the old one. Maybe it's the Jetstones and the Flintstones again a little bit at the same time. It will be interesting how it plays out, but I think in the supply chain it'll be very interesting to see what it impacts for logistics, whether a more service mentality needs to be applied to serve a fleet, for example, on service parts, for example, or connected cars, and it could have a big impact on the people in this room too, I would guess. Any other questions, comments from the floor? Right up in the front here.
Márcio da Nissan. Eu vi o comentário a respeito de BID, né, sendo mencionado 2 vezes no começo da apresentação e agora. E como cliente, né, eu queria aproveitar a oportunidade e falar um pouco sobre isso, até porque eu estou vivenciando nesse momento. Então, eu começo dizendo que esse processo de BID, ele é algo que dá trabalho, né, ele requer investimento de pessoas, conhecimento, não é algo simples.
I talk by my own experience because normally we leave that for last. So it's a very common model is to take the last one and try to update information based on the last model and put it in the market. And then there's that feeling of I, as a client, will request something that I cannot make myself, and market will be saying that will meet needs that it can't meet. We need transparency and maturity in this relation, because this is something that in theory, the bid itself, I don't see it as a bad process. I think it's a good one that allows to assess how much my current supplier adheres to what I understand as a need. Or even if I don't know whether it's needed or not, they meet my expectations. So I have to go to the market and seek information about what's going on and see if I'm in line with all these transformations or not. And somehow this supplier should be able to meet my expectation. When I go out to the market, I say my neighbor is doing that way, but I'm already close to that or going towards that direction because my supplier is going in the right direction. I believe that there is a need from both parts to be put enough time to have a good relation. This relation of perennity, without doubt, is a good one. The exchange somehow makes an impact. And I believe also that there is a good way for suppliers to adjust themselves and understand the business growingly. Today I saw a transportation bid. I have 2 companies that serve me. When I go to the market, there are better things out there that are more in line with what my business requires for the future. And it's bad when you have someone inside that was not able to see that and bring all that I just realized that exists and I didn't know. So what made that company not bring that knowledge? And in the end, it's work and action, having someone there who is also seeking information and tries to bring possibilities to go ahead, to go forward. So all this requires investment, and many times what I see is that all the energy that's used, the process is bad, there's wasted energy, and after you go in, I don't put a lot of energy because it took so long to start that process, and I know that's going to finish soon. So there is good opportunity for both parties to develop and arrive at this partnership and collaboration model where each one understands each other. And my suppliers should be a part of my business like I am. In theory, I should do transportation. Why? Because I'm too small. I have more ability to gain efficiency. So how how I change my shelf solutions and start making customized solutions for my clients. As a client, I say this supplier is so Nissan or so some other company like as I am. I'm experiencing this now. So that's why I'm saying there's a lot of opportunities for everyone, but we have to work on them. Negotiating is work. Oh, oh,
For the observation and comment, I think it rings true, I'm sure, for many here. We have just a few more minutes before we probably start to wrap up. Any other comments, questions, points you want to make from the audience? Well, then maybe my last question, it's almost December, so it's almost Christmas time. It's time to get into that spirit. It comes but once a year. Excluding, of course, a very strong and healthy economy and health and all the stuff we all hope for. What is on your logistic wish list for Christmas this year? If you could have a wish, perhaps it's from your suppliers, perhaps it's from your boss, perhaps it's from your teammates. I leave it for you to sort of decide who the Santa Claus is in this particular question. So, from FCA, what's on your wish list this year?
Volume, 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 volume. Depois de 3 anos.
volume, volume, volume. After 3 years of dropping, everything that we want is demand, because everyone got stronger during this period. So if you have a demand that's solid and is sustainable along the period, it will be good for everyone, as country, as society, as company. So I think this is what we need, and we are ready for it. We're more mature for everything we went through in this period due to politics and everything else made us more prepared and more critical, and we tolerate less than we used to 4 or 5 years ago. So the perspective is positive. Having volume with the experience that we have acquired, we have a successful track ahead of us. So the word is volume, volume, volume.
Acho que volume é importante.
I think volume is important, in fact, but I think that my greatest desire, it was interesting when somebody showed Mexico's strategy. Mexico got prepared to be a great, large exporter, and whilst Brazil was being protectionist. So next year is a very critical year for us in terms of political definitions. So it would be, what I would wish is a little bit of light so that we manage to be more competitive as a country. So we should eliminate a series of bureaucracies that we live today in terms of customs and the most emerging situation which happens every year end. If we manage to have a little bit of goodwill in this change that we know it's happening,
Se tornar mais competitivo.
I think the country would be more competitive and the volume will come with it. And I think the country is already an exporter and it's becoming more and more exporter every day. If we if we are more competitive in terms of taxes, we will manage this volume and we'll manage to leverage all the potential that we have. So this is my highest Christmas wish. And for my team, we're gonna pay for your ice creams at the end of the year. So it's been a very hard year for everyone, and I think I owe more to them than I should receive from them. So this would be my gift if government collaborates and to change this perception. This will take a while, unfortunately, but I believe that with the potential that we had, we will be able to get there one day. We'll making our first steps, and more this will go into that direction. That's my dream.
Simples, na verdade, pensando em fechamento.
My wish is very simple, thinking of the closure of the last quarter of the year. It's not going to Santa Claus, but to my supplier bases, because I need I need ships, I need planes, and so we need that this offer and demand curve changes positively in favor of the transporters at this time. So we will be seeing a year that's difficult in terms of that capacity, but we need the collaboration until the 30th of December to be able to deliver results.
Trees to get those ships and trucks and lots of volume underneath it, but I think, you know, if we all work together.
Aquela forest.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, what's left of them, okay? Just don't chop any more down and we'll try. But no, I think that was just a fun way to sort of end it, but I think the message there is obviously clear, and we can see, you know, it's not going to be Father Christmas that comes and delivers these things for us. We're going to need to work together as an industry, as teams, as partners to achieve them. So thank you for that. I want to thank the panel for their time and discussion on this. Thank you again. Thank you. And also thanks once again to all of you again for participating in our 9th conference this year. Like we said, it's the first one in a couple of years in which we've been able to at least deliver some good news, and we hope that this builds some nice momentum going into 2018 and to next year. I do think, Paolo, I think you're going to dress up as Father Christmas this evening, right, and give out some caipirinha and steaks at least. So at least we have that to look forward for tonight. We have the Penske-hosted gala dinner. We're going to have buses leaving fairly shortly from the main entrance of the hotel. So if you're taking the bus, go up to the ground floor, and the buses are already waiting. We'll take off as soon as we're kind of ready. And obviously, those of you who are meeting us there, please do so. We do look forward to seeing you there. And we thank Penske again for another great collaboration, and we're sure it's going to be a great evening. I just want to remind you again, as we sort of wrap up here, about the evaluation forms. Before you leave, just take a couple of minutes to fill those in. You can hand it in to one of our staff, or just simply leave it on the table. We'll pick it up. We just really do appreciate having some of that feedback so that we can build that into the program. I don't think I need to sum up everything we've spoken about, because our panel actually did it so well. But I mean, clearly, I think partnership and collaboration sort of jumps out by a mile in terms of what many of you need. The lessons, like I said, whether it's the lessons learned or the lessons we still need to learn. I think the jury is still out. Overall, in terms of that, I'm very encouraged by the direction that the industry seems to want to go, by all the sentiment expressed here, and the interest in working together. I think that the hard part is obviously to do that, but at least you're pointing in the right direction. And I look forward to seeing the results of that. Please keep in touch with us at Automotive Logistics, myself, Louis Yakumi, who I'm sure many of you know, our editorial team. We're always interested to hear from you, whether through LinkedIn, whether through articles and stories that we can do. Hopefully you receive the magazine, or you receive our weekly newsletter, our news. We send it out in Portuguese as well, at least the news. We translate a selection of stories. So this is and remains a major area of interest for us. And as you know, hopefully we do conferences around the world. And just looking ahead a little bit, we've talked about Mexico a couple of times. It was even on Marcelo's Christmas list to be a little bit more like Mexico. If any one of you are interested in seeing a little bit more, learning a bit more about Mexico, we have a conference there in Mexico City towards the end of January, January 25th to 27th, I believe, in Mexico City. Would love to see some of you there. Another opportunity to exchange some lessons and ideas. We'll also be streaming that session, that conference, so you'll have a chance to view some presentations and even communicate online if that's how you prefer to do it. And we do events I won't run through the list of all of them, but in the US, in Germany, in China, India, and of course here in Sao Paulo, where we very much look forward to continuing to work with all of you and continuing to hopefully see the fruits of the recovery here. So all that's left for me now is to encourage you to join us now at the Car restaurant for the Penske-hosted gala dinner. We can continue this discussion in a little bit more of a jovial way. Look forward to see what Father Christmas has in store for us. I want to thank you all once again and look forward to continuing this evening. So thank you.